Claude Lemieux wasn't just a hockey player, he was a storm. The kind of player who could score the dagger goal, throw the hit that changed a series, or ignite a rivalry with nothing more than a smirk. Fans loved him or hated him, but nobody ignored him. And for all his intensity, all his game-breaking moments, there were 6 players who got under his skin in ways the rest never could. These weren't just opponents, they were men who pushed him past the line, sparked chaos, and created some of the most shocking moments the NHS has ever seen. Today, we're diving into the 6 players Claude Lemieux absolutely hated the most. If you love intense hockey rivalries and the pure chaos of the old school NHL, make sure to hit that like button. It helps this story reach more fans who still appreciate the fire of that era. Number 6, Scott Stevens. Before they ever shared a locker room in New Jersey, Claude Lemieux and Scott Stevens were already colliding in some of the NHL's most physical, unforgiving battles. Stevens was the league's most feared hitter, the human sledgehammer of the 80s and 90s. A defenseman who didn't just stop plays, he ended them. Every shift against him felt like a test of survival, and Lemieux knew it. Their rivalry sparked in those brutal Montreal-Washington matchups, where Stevens hunted with cold precision and Lemieux attacked with relentless, playoff-fueled pressure. It wasn't personal at first, but it was inevitable. 2 forces built to crash into each other again and again. Stevens played defense like a predator stalking prey, patient, silent, lurking in the weeds until the perfect moment. Lemieux, meanwhile, loved chaos, cutting through lanes, agitating opponents, stirring emotion. Their styles were destined to conflict. Stevens viewed players like Lemieux as targets that needed to be neutralized early, before they could swing a game. Lemieux saw Stevens as a danger you had to outthink, outpace, or simply survive. Every shift became a gamble. Every rush came with a question. Where is Stevens? And is he coming? One night, the answer arrived with terrifying clarity. Lemieux came streaking down the wing, head angled toward the puck just long enough for Stevens to lock onto him. The hit was thunderous, the kind that makes the boards shudder and the arena gasp all at once. You could feel the shock ripple through both benches. Broadcasters instantly changed tone, fans rose in disbelief, and players instinctively skated toward the collision like they were drawn to a lightning strike. That moment elevated their rivalry into something sharper, something edged with genuine danger. Stevens later brushed off the impact with his iconic line, "If you skate with your head down, that's your fault." Even years later, when the two were teammates hoisting a Stanley Cup, stories circulated about how their past still hung in the air. A quiet tension forged by years of violent collisions that no handshake or championship could fully erase. Their rivalry wasn't built on anger or words, but on the fear and respect that come from surviving the hardest version of the sport. Scott Stevens represented the NHL at its most unforgiving, a reminder that one mistake, one glance down, one mistimed stride could change everything. And for Claude Lemieux, facing Stevens wasn't just a matchup, it was a test of courage in the most dangerous era hockey had ever seen. Number 5, Wendell Clark. Wendell Clark was the kind of player who made opponents reconsider every stride they took. Toronto's fearless captain, a pound-for-pound wrecking ball, and one of the most naturally tough players the game has ever seen. Clark didn't need to say much. His presence did the talking. For Claude Lemieux, Clark wasn't just another opponent. He was a constant threat, a reminder that one wrong angle, one slow step, could turn into a disaster. Every time Lemieux stepped on the ice against Toronto, he had to scan for Clark first. That's how real the danger was. Their rivalry was born in those gritty, emotionally charged late 80s and early 90s Montreal-Toronto battles. Games packed with hatred, momentum swings, and a playoff-like atmosphere, even in the regular season. Clark's style was brutally straightforward. Finish every check, punish anyone who crossed the middle, and defend the Leafs' crest with everything he had. Lemieux was the opposite, opportunistic, sneaky, agitating, always looking for a moment to turn chaos into a scoring chance or a psychological advantage. When those two energies collided, sparks flew. Board battles became wars. Net front scrums turned into full-on brawls. And every time they met, you could feel the tension ripple through the arena. One night at Maple Leaf Gardens, that tension exploded. Lemieux collected the puck along the wall, thinking he had a half second to pivot. Clark read the play instantly. He closed the gap with terrifying speed and delivered a hit so explosive, the benches jolted to their feet. The boards rattled, the crowd roared, and for a brief moment the entire rink felt stunned. It wasn't dirty, just violently clean, the kind of impact only Clark could deliver. From that moment on, their rivalry went from intense to dangerous. Lemieux never forgot that hit, and Clark never gave him the chance to. Years later, a former teammate of Lemieux said, before every shift against Toronto, Claude would look for Clark. Not because he feared him, but because he respected what could happen if he didn't. Broadcasters loved it too. Whenever the camera caught them on the ice together, commentary tightened, voices sharpened, and fans leaned forward in anticipation. These weren't normal hockey moments. They were confrontations between two players who brought out the absolute rawest, most primal version of each other. Their rivalry shaped Lemieux in ways few others did. Clark forced him to elevate his physical courage, sharpen his instincts, and embrace the full brutality of the era. Facing Wendell Clark wasn't just about playing hockey, it was about proving you could survive it. Number 4, Ty Domi. Ty Domi wasn't just an agitator, he was the agitator. Loud, fearless, endlessly annoying, and built like a fire hydrant with fists, he was the NHL's most iconic pest. And for Claude Lemieux, Domi represented a different kind of threat. Not the silent, crushing danger of a Scott Stevens or the raw power of a Wendell Clark, but psychological warfare. Domi chirped from warm-ups to the final buzzer. He laughed, poked, shoved, smirked, and dragged opponents into battles they didn't want. And nobody hated that more than Lemieux. Their personality clash was instant. Domi's loudmouth swagger versus Lemieux's cold, smug, I'll hurt your team on the scoreboard arrogance, oils and water, gasoline, and a match. Their rivalry really ignited when Toronto and Colorado crossed paths at their peaks. Domi made Lemieux a personal project. Every shift, he shadowed him, bumping him after whistles, chirping him on face-offs, and daring him to drop the gloves. Lemieux despised it. He prided himself on being the villain on his own terms. But Domi flipped that script. He weaponized his mouth as effectively as his fists, mocking Lemieux's reputation, teasing his ego, and provoking him in front of crowds who loved every second of it. Anytime they shared the ice, you could feel the energy shift. Fans expected chaos. Players braced for it. One night, Domi crossed the line in a way only he could. After a heated battle in the corner, Lemieux skated away trying to reset the shift. Domi followed, barking something so disrespectful that Lemieux stopped dead in his tracks. In a flash, gloves didn't drop, everything dropped. A shove, a retaliatory shot, sticks clashing, both benches rising in unison. The arena exploded. Commentators instantly raised their voices. Domi had done it. He'd pushed Lemieux too far, and Lemieux reacted in a way nobody expected. It was one of those moments where sound itself felt sharper, where you could sense the hatred instantly thicken. Domi later joked, "If Claude played in my division all year, I'd retire from fighting. I'd be too busy." It was classic Domi, but it irritated Lemieux more than any punch ever could. Broadcasters loved covering their matchups because you never knew what would happen. A goal, a fight, a meltdown, all were equally possible. This was a rivalry built on unpredictability and personality, not just hits and checks. In many ways, their feud showed just how deeply the mental game mattered in that era. Domi didn't need to beat Lemieux physically. Getting into his head was enough to tilt a game, and few players in NHL history ever managed to live rent-free in Claude Lemieux's mind. But Domi absolutely did. Number 3, Brendan Shanahan. Brendan Shanahan was built for war. Detroit's elite power forward, a rare, lethal blend of scoring ability, old-school toughness, and unwavering leadership, became one of Claude Lemieux's most unshakable enemies the moment he arrived in Hockeytown. Shanahan despised cheap shots, despised disrespect, and despised players who crossed the line without owning it. And Claude Lemieux, to him, was the poster child for that style of play. Their rivalry wasn't a slow burn, it ignited instantly, fueled by the volcanic tension already raging between the Avalanche and Red Wings. Shanahan entered the Detroit-Colorado feud not as a follower, but as a torchbearer. He embraced the war. He took on Lemieux directly, shift after shift, body after body. Their battles became highlights of the rivalry, bruising collisions along the boards, teeth-rattling checks through the neutral zone, stare-downs that looked like two apex predators circling the same territory. What made their confrontations so intense was the hatred already smoldering between the teams. Every hit carried emotional weight. Every whistle felt like a threat. Every shift had the potential to erupt. Lemieux thrived in hostile environments, but Shanahan brought a level of controlled fury that even he wasn't used to facing. One night, during a heated face-off, the tension between them finally boiled over. Shanahan leaned in, eyes locked on Lemieux, and muttered a single word that carried across microphones and lips of fans reading it later. Dirty. He didn't yell it. He didn't bark it. He delivered it like a verdict. Lemieux fired back, and players from both sides braced themselves, sensing something dangerous hanging in the air. From that moment forward, every shift that followed in the game, and the series, felt heavier, thicker, more personal. Broadcasters often pointed out how Shanahan reacted whenever Lemieux stirred chaos. His jaw tightened, his posture shifted, and he hunted Lemieux with a purpose that teammates could feel. One former wing said, "You always knew when Claude woke up the monster in Shanny." These two didn't just fight for momentum. They fought for identity. Lemieux saw himself as the ultimate competitor, the emotional fire starter. Shanahan believed he was the standard of toughness and accountability. Their rivalry became philosophical as much as physical. What defines a hockey warrior? Pure grit, or the willingness to do anything to win. The battles between Shanahan and Lemieux didn't just fuel the Detroit-Colorado rivalry, they defined it. Shanahan wasn't trying to beat Lemieux, he was trying to break the myth of him, challenge his legacy, and expose him. And in doing so, he pushed the rivalry into an emotional frenzy that hockey fans still talk about decades later. Number 2, Darren McCarty. Darren McCarty wasn't just an enforcer, he was Detroit's heartbeat, the emotional engine of a team that hated Claude Lemieux with every fiber of its being. As Chris Draper's closest friend and protector, McCarty carried a role far heavier than throwing punches. He carried loyalty, he carried anger, and after the infamous Draper hit, he carried a mission. His rivalry with Lemieux wasn't about hockey, toughness, or pride, it was about vengeance. Pure, boiling, righteous vengeance that the entire city of Detroit demanded. When Lemieux smashed Draper's face into the boards during the 1996 Western Conference Final, it didn't just break bone, it broke something inside the Red Wings. Draper's shattered jaw, the stitches, the wired shut mouth. Detroit players stood in that locker room staring at their teammate, stunned into silence. Then they saw Lemieux's reaction, or lack of one. No apology, no regret, not even eye contact. From that moment, the rivalry became something darker. The media hammered Lemieux. Fans wanted blood. And in the middle of that storm, McCarty made a silent promise to Draper, to himself, and to Detroit. I'll take care of it. For the next 10 months, every Wings-Avs matchup carried the weight of that moment. But nothing compared to March 26, 1997, a date burned into NHL history. The moment Lemieux touched the ice, McCarty locked onto him. It wasn't a question of if something would happen, it was when, and then it exploded. McCarty charged at Lemieux with a fury years in the making, grabbing him, hammering him with punches, dragging him across the ice as both benches erupted into chaos. Fans weren't cheering, they were roaring, shaking the arena with a primal, cathartic release. Detroit had been holding in since the Draper hit. McCarty later said, "I made him pay. I had to." Broadcasters described the moment as revenge, justice, and madness all happening at once. Lemieux turtled on the ice as Avalanche players rushed to his defense, only adding fuel to the fire. The brawl became instantly legendary, the kind of moment that defines not just a rivalry, but an era of hockey. It was violent, emotional, unforgettable. That confrontation changed everything. It cemented McCarty as a Detroit icon, solidified the Red Wings' identity as a team that protected its own, and elevated the Avalanche-Red Wings feud into the most passionate war the NHL has ever seen. And at the center of it all stood one truth. For McCarty, this rivalry was never about the game. It was about standing up for Draper, no matter the cost. Number 1, Chris Draper. Chris Draper was never the kind of player who drew headlines. He wasn't a superstar, wasn't a fighter, wasn't a villain. He was Detroit's relentless grinder, a speed-driven, blue-collar workhorse who earned every second of ice time with determination and discipline. And maybe that's why the rivalry between him and Claude Lemieux became so explosive. Draper was respected across the league. He played clean, honest hockey, which made the moment Lemieux destroyed him in the 1996 Western Conference Final feel like a crime rather than a collision. This wasn't just another hit. This became the moment, the center of Lemieux's darkest chapter. Game 6. Avalanche versus Red Wings. Tempers high, speed unbelievable, the stakes enormous. Draper went to retrieve the puck along the boards, something he'd done thousands of times in his career. In a split-second decision that would echo for decades, Lemieux barreled into him from behind with full force. Draper's face smashed into the ledge at the bottom of the boards. The arena gasped before the announcers even processed it. Draper lay there, blood rushing, disoriented, his teammates frozen in horror. The hit didn't just injure him, it disfigured him. Broken orbital bone, cheek shattered, jaw fractured, dozens of stitches. His face so swollen and distorted that one of his own teammates said they didn't recognize him. And then came the moment the hockey world still talks about. Draper turned his head toward the bench, and players saw what Lemieux had done. "I couldn't even recognize myself in the mirror," Draper later said. Detroit players weren't just angry, they were devastated, shaking with emotion. The media erupted. Broadcasters condemned Lemieux. Analysts called it one of the dirtiest moments in NHL history. And what stung Detroit even more was Lemieux's lack of remorse. No apology, no concern, nothing that resembled accountability. That coldness poured gasoline on the fire. His teammates swore revenge. Quite literally, they circled around Draper in the hospital and promised him payback. Fans demanded justice. Coaches felt helpless rage. Even neutral fans knew something had shifted. This wasn't rivalry anymore. It was hatred. pure and volatile, and everyone knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. This single moment reshaped the NHL. It sparked the greatest team rivalry the sport has ever seen, redefined both franchises, and cemented Claude Lemieux as the league's most infamous villain. Draper didn't throw a punch, didn't start a fight, yet he became the emotional backbone of a war that would spill across seasons, arenas, and generations. This rivalry didn't just define Lemieux's legacy, it defined an entire era of hockey. These weren't just rivalries, they were battles that shaped Claude Lemieux's entire identity. Six men who pushed him, challenged him, enraged him, and ultimately carved some of the most unforgettable moments the NHL has ever seen. From the bone-shaking hits to the psychological warfare to the injuries, the payback, and the chaos that defined an era, these clashes weren't about stats or box scores. They were about pride. They were about legacy. They were about what it meant to survive and thrive in the most explosive decade of hockey's history. But now it's your turn. Who do you think was Claude Lemieux's greatest rival? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next game. If you want more deep dives into legendary hockey feuds, forgotten grudges, and the moments that shaped the NHL, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.